Thank you so much, Mr. Dlamini, for the presentation on the national budget. Are there any questions from the floor? Questions that are directed to Mr. Dlamini? I'll take this hand, another hand there. Okay. There's a third hand there. So I'll start with these three. Yeah, you can. Do you want the questions to be asked at one go or?
Yeah.
Okay. So we'll start here. Thank you, Doc.
There's an issue for the figures on the budget. From the reliable information which is there, for example, this year's budget, ministries were not given their monies. Toward the ZIG like there, I can give you an example. The Ministry of Health was allocated 27.8 billion last year, this year, but they only received 10 billion, which is 36%. Education was given 42 million and was only given 19 billion, which is 46% only. Higher and tertiary education was given 9.86 billion, and they were only given 3.something billion, which is 30%. Only the two ministries, they received more than 100%, which is the Ministry of Transport and Infrastructure, which received 223%. Then the other ministry, it was the President's Office, 102%. So all these figures which you are seeing here, practically they are not working with the current. That's the first thing. We need to be honest, ladies and gentlemen. Doctor, these are figures, but ministry, they want what? They won't receive these figures. That is my first worry, that we are given figures, 30 billion, we are quoting these figures, but are we getting them? These are the available forms. It is September, and by that September, the minister has to declare that the government is now bankrupt. There are no funds. So that's the first thing, which is what to us as social workers, like what you're saying, those who are in the health, and as role leaders. Thank you on this one. Then my second one is in the issue of increase in VAT by that 5%, 0.05. Not a mistake. That is very, very the cause of concern to the consumers, and it's also the cause of concern to the business. Why? Because it might be seen too little, but when aggregated, it becomes substantial. For example, $100, 15%, that is 115. Then when you increase that 5, it means something will end up at 115.5. With some they might charge it $116 to the nearest. So the burden can also pass to the consumers. And also there might be a risk of because I'm used to buy something with $100, 115, then it's 116. That's the point matching the movement might distract the consumer behavior and the pattern of buying and the pattern of consuming. So that is a very critical area, which you know that the 2%, which is saying I've been reducing the 2% to 1.5. Yes, it's good for us, but it was like an arbitrage. It was compensated by that 0.5 increase in VAT. So it also goes to us that when it seems like the burden has been lessened, the minister has to come up with other means of trying to cover up for those revenues. Like what the presenter says, Doc said, the challenge which he has that we are talking about. I like the way he explains to say we are charging tax on the movement of the cash other than the production. That is based on its own. So that is another critical point which we are supposed to take note that we cannot celebrate the decrease in 1.5. That's 0.05 decrease. While we are suffering from the increase of 0.05 increase in VAT. We are not going anywhere on this one. Then the issue of charging. My last issue, when you are saying we have now increased to say if you are withdrawing more than $500, the extra $1 you are going to withdraw during the course of the year, of that month, it's monthly, you are going to be charged about 2%, then to increase progressively as you go on. It's 10 at 1,000, then it goes to 3% and so on. I don't think that one is a good point. I think the minister on his own, he could have even acknowledge or incentivize or trying to reward those who are saving the money. Because they are talking about the people who are already, people they don't have banking confidence. But when people they were trying to gain confidence, then something coming like this, it becomes a major problem, especially when you look at our economy, that our economy is informal. The informal sector is dominating. So that dominance of the informal sector, who is going to go and bank his money or his cash, who is going to wait to bank the money which exceeds $500. It means when my money, I'm banking maybe 500, then it's now 499, I'll quickly go and withdraw my money because I'm afraid of that $1 which is going to be taxed heavily. So on this issue, I think the minister has to look on that, to revise those things. So there is no, from my own opinion, in conclusion, there is no any benefit from us, even the residents, or we as residents. We don't have much benefits. There is no, we cannot smile because it was an arbitrary. Try reducing this, then try to raise this. That was a like what you call it's compensating. So that is my point. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot for the presentation, Doc. We appreciate, but generally we feel like this policy, this budget really does not speak to the youth. It speaks to other ministries, not the youth. Because I'll give an example. The Youth Empowerment Ministry was given 1.7 billion, which is less than a third of the Ministry of Defense, which is 19.7 billion. So there is a large contrast, talking particularly when you look into the statistics of the population of the youth. They make 66.7% of the population of Zimbabwe. Therefore, the following questions then come about when you look into all this. The first question will be, this budget claims to be responsive to the needs of the youth, but what concrete measurable initiatives are included to create sustainable jobs for Zimbabwe's large population who are facing chronic unemployment, which is constantly rising? As we know, this November, most youths finished writing their ZimSec exams. Some were writing a hack score, some were even finishing in universities. So the population of youths that are going there unemployed is still continuing to rise. Given past failures of youth empowerment funds, such as small poultry projects that have been introduced in the past, how will this budget ensure larger scale capital intensive opportunities in sectors like manufacturing, technology, and renewable energy? The second question speaks to the education skills and training. How will the budget expand timely disbursement of the basic education assistant module, which is BEAM, to keep vulnerable youth, especially girls, in the schools and reduce dropout rates? Will there be increased funding for technical and vocational education to equip youth with skills relevant to the modern economy? And will these programs be linked to job displacement? Thank you.
My name is Priti Nyanja from Dubani State University. I'm an economist there. So thanks so much for the wonderful presentation. But from the presentation, we are also talking about the 24-hour economy, which is a good idea. It's a good approach, especially on improving efficiency and the production, and also improving the output within the country, possibly in the employment creation. But I find that there were some incentives that have been introduced, and all these incentives, they are meant to address the first thematic area from the 10 that are mentioned from the NDSC and from the budget, right? But then as we talk about the tax deductions from the night shift operating costs, you find that companies from the manufacturing sector have already shifted from heavy production during the day to night production because of the utility cost of electricity during the night is much cheaper than during the day, such that this measure is not bringing much value because the companies have already shifted. But at the same time, do we have the support infrastructure? Because most of the time we find that we have load shedding. Previously, they were talking about separating line for manufacturing sector from the general use of electricity. But we still have challenges that the manufacturing industry is facing. And to stop a big plant running, right? It might take 2 to 4 hours to run the same plant without producing anything, which is also a cost to the industry. Yeah. Then I also want to talk about the import duty rebates and also customs. Looking at as much as we want to support the textile industry, for example, we talk about from the cotton to clothing value chain. There is David Whitehead that we need to support, right? But you find that there are challenges associated with the porous border post. And at the same time, the quality of cotton that we are producing within the country, as much as it's of the best quality, but the best quality first grades is exported, in which this introduction of trying to revive the cotton to clothing value chain is going to be affected because of the quality of the material that we have in the country. The best quality material is exported underground. And so at the same time, the porous border post, we have seen some initiatives that have been introduced, but there is no value. But how can we talk about the 24-hour economy without talking about the financial sector? Do you have a mechanism that is meant to support the industry from retooling? Previously, just soon after COVID-19, we were talking about the modalities to finance the manufacturing sector. But how far are we with those modalities that never came to operation? Some companies never received. We never got to know what happened to those modalities so that the industry receive, and there is no support to the financial sector. I think that's my intervention. Thanks so much.
I will not attempt to answer all because remember I'm not presenting the budget. But I will respond. I will respond to the concerns and share my perspective from how I also perceive it. Doc raised a very significant questions. I think there were about 3 of them, all speaking to what the budget contains. Firstly, I think you spoke to the concern about funds disbursement, allocation versus disbursement. Even our own Ministry of Industry and Trade, I think we had about 23% disbursement by the time we had the pre-budget seminar. There is always that challenge that even parliamentarians were highlighting during the pre-budget seminar to say there is a difference between allocation and disbursement because it's a cash-based budget. It depends on how revenues are collected and then they are disbursed accordingly. What we are celebrating, what we are talking about here is allocation and not disbursement. Our worry is where we see some having overspent their allocation without proper channels for ratification of such. That's why we have those unexplained expenditures that we are also concerned about. But I think that has been pushed across through the members of parliament pressing for the expedient dispensation. We still do not have evidence as to why others managed to exhaust and exceed while others failed. Well, we are still also curious as to the modalities behind it, but I think it was highlighted as well. And the other issue pertained to VAT increases, the paradox of taxation. We have removed 0.5% from the IMTT in the local currency and placed it in the end of the consumer. This has the risk of increasing prices in the short term as producers shift the burden to the final consumer. The understanding, the rationale behind that was to unlock value in the value chain by removing the cost of doing business from the value chain into the final consumer. The assumption from my interpretation is that these producers will transfer the saving to the consumer via prices, but we know prices are rigid downwards. And the challenge we have of profiteering is still a culture that will undermine the effectiveness of this policy. That is our worry, that they may not translate it into a saving which will reflect in lower prices for the consumers, but they will see it as an increase in their profitability and continue to punish the consumer. That's our biggest worry about the real adjustments to the IMTT. That's why we recommend that there be a gradual and a clear strategy of doing away with the IMTT. Stop taxing transactions, stop taxing velocity of circulation. Tax value. Let there be value, and then you tax value. But let's create it that way. That's a genuine concern. Other concerns are related to the allocation towards the youth. How sensitive is the budget towards allocating to the youth? I only saw social protection. There is allocation to women's bank. Usually, women and youth are usually bundled together. So when you find that 50% of the budget contains education, social protection, as well as women affairs, the assumption there would be the youth are also included in that. That's the assumption we make generally when we're looking at the sensitivity of the budget to gender and other social issues. We primarily look at those indices, the allocation to those sectors, and assume that. But we appreciate, I also share the same sentiments. The youth are a significant demographic in our country, and they must also receive a commensurate share of the allocation of resources. That is a credible one. There was a question on the night economy. Very good observation, economist. Most manufacturers have shifted to the night shift because of the tariffs. The differential tariffs that reward night shift has seen most already enjoying that. So to incentivize them perhaps would not yield the same outcome that is predicted by that particular tax. But however, we may be looking at it at a smaller scale, perhaps as a grander scale. We will interrogate it, but from our experience in our industrial hubs in Bulawayo and so forth, the night night shifts have been on the rise because of the shifts in tariffs. But when we look at the climate finance incentives that have been put in place, they would likely drive green industries, which we expect they will lower the cost of doing business for most, because energy is a significant contributor to the cost of doing business. But I saw some incentives for the green industry embedded in the budget. Climate finance seems to have taken a greater limelight in this budget than other budgets. So, but not to negate that observation. It's a very honest and candid observation as an economist. You pardon me, there tended to be many questions. I tried to recall. If I missed any other, please remind me. Yes.
I also asked a question in relation to BIM.
Oh yes, BIM. There's an allocation for under the expenditure and arrears clearance strategy to repay the arrears that are owed towards BIM.
My question specifically was, how will the budget expand and timely disperse? Because we realize that the disbursements of funds for BIM have always been late, and currently the government is going, if I'm not mistaken, it's more than 8 million in terms of BIM funds that should be dispersed to pay off
the
fees for students that are in need. Meaning they are facing challenges as they are getting out there, because now they are left to be in areas in whichever institution that they will have been registered in.
Yes.
So the question basically is, how will there be timely disbursement of the BIM funds, and will the budget be expanded to accommodate vulnerable youths, especially girls, in schools and reduce school dropouts, particularly in reserve areas. No, I'll give an example. Like someone that comes down deep there from Madambuzi or Dongo
Yes.
Will the funds reach someone deep down in Dongo Temade as they will reach someone down there in Prince Edward or in town, in a central setup, like in a town, in Harare? That's the question.
Well, I cannot speak to Tamia's dispensation because that's the duty of the Ministry of Finance and Development. But we have been advocating and lobbying for Tamia's disbursements of funds. As to the expansion, I think when we look at the spirit behind NDS2 of inclusivity, we believe that there is going to be an improvement, hence the areas and expenditure clearance strategy. It clearly, I think it has a section on BIM, the amount of BIM that was allocated inclusive of areas. Now the disbursement, which we can't speak to often because it's outside our control, but we're looking at the signals. You know, our duty as analysts is to look at the signals and the noise that is in the policy document. The signal is saying there is an allocation, there's a recognition of the importance of that sector. The signal is there. The noise is in the Tamia's disbursement. That's where the noise is. So we, as analysts, will highlight those and say there is a signal, but there is also noise there. That's why we recommend that there be Tamia's disbursement, because this affects the livelihoods of a very critical sector of our economy. Yes, Chibe.
No, it's a new question.
Thank you.
Yeah, so just I want to say a budget, like any other plan, should be informed by information on the ground. So my question is, how representative is the budget in terms of the needs on the ground? So one of the problems that we're faced with the budget, with these national budgets, is that these budgets are not needs-based. I'm sure that's why Doc here also asked about the figures, to say these figures are not representative of the actual problems. So hence the biggest question is to say, to what extent does the ministry do a needs assessment? Because the budgets should be needs-based. When you are planning and you want to attach funds, you must first know that on the ground, education is lacking in terms of ABCD. Hence, we need to put more resources towards building schools or other things. So I don't know whether our budgeting system in Zimbabwe really does an extensive needs assessment before the. I'm sure that's why even that the guy from NYTT is talking about lack of allocation of resources to issues to do with youth and so forth. It is a symptom that the budget itself, starting from the process of budgeting, are we doing the right thing or not? And then my second input is about issues of corruption. For us to finance some of these things that are in the budget, isn't it we also rely on international monetary bodies there? But then, to what extent are we going to be trusted given our lack of transparency and corrupt activities in the country? What mechanisms can we have in place? So those are my inputs. Thank you.
I think the details of the budget cycle are adhered to. We look at the consultative processes that start in June, they are adhered to. Up to the pre-budget seminar that we actually had here in Bulawayo, which I attended at ZITF, where our elected members of parliament were representing and our ministries were representing what they need as line ministries. But one thing I've come to realize as a seasoned economist is the 80-20 rule. 80% of the outcomes we see are decided by 20% of the people. Because if you look at the attendance right now, this is about 20% of the 100% of the people who are concerned about the budget. But we, the 20%, show up for the consultations to make decisions for the 80%. The 80% show up to blame the 20% for showing up. But the 80-20 rule, unfortunately, is a reality. There's apathy in most of the consultative processes. I attended the local authority budget launch of their consultative process. I think we're barely a 20% reflection of Bulawayo's needs and its population. But were they making decisions for the 80% that did not show up? But unfortunately, I'm not justifying, but I'm observing over time that the 80-20 rule just does suffice and ends up reflecting in the decisions that we see. I've heard some asking me, how did you reach this policy? Who was consulted? And all associations will claim, put a disclaimer and say, we were never consulted. But when they were invited, did they show up? Did they show up to explain? I'm not justifying, I'm just bringing an observation that that's why some critics will argue that then this statistics will look like it's a pomp taking GDP after the pomp taking legend of 1787, where he created a virtual village just to impress an empress. But we are saying, are we showing up? Right now, look at our representation. It's not reflective of what we really need. And I think there's been a move of late of having evidence-based policy making, but resource constraints also may hinder the full adoption of that. But I'm not justifying. But I know that for sure I've attended a number of pre-budget consultative processes to second that. Let me put gender balance and
corruption.
Well, I always say corruption is difficult to measure and to pinpoint, and as they will say, bring evidence. It is one of the most elusive, but well talked about. I'm coming from a ZAC validation workshop right now where we were validating a strategy for fighting corruption. Well, I'm not an authority on it, but I would say from what I heard.
Yeah, but we've had issues which have been in public.
Yes. Perhaps for gender balance, Norma, then I'll come to you. Yes.
I just wanted to add on to what Mr. Chibea was talking about.
Yes.
Is there any consideration now in the budget, seeing that all our donors, most of our donors have pulled out?
Yes.
We are going to need more for youth, more for education, more for health. Was there that consideration? Just thinking.
Good question. Let me take his as well. I don't want to remember.
Oh, my name is Buso Mukwananzi. I'm not an economist, I'm a bush boy. But looking at the budget, you would clearly see that we are coming from a high volatile environment whereby we needed to stabilize the economy. And one of the things to stabilize that, we needed to have a stable currency. And if we have a stable currency, it means the economy will follow suit. But coming to the issue of the single digit inflation, which was said by the minister, I think if you look and mirror into the budget, that is achievable. But it should be a 5%, it should be in relationship to the projected growth of 6%. So it means we need to have a single digit inflation of 5% so that it complements the projected growth of 5%. So by so doing, I think we will have sort of like a temporal lure in terms of because that will prevent the inflation. So when the inflation is prevented, by so doing, we have a temporary sort of like stability. So how now I now come to the issue where Doc was saying, why others there is a sort of like a long term in terms of financing ministries. If you go back in the history of the country, you'll see that before the economy was into doldrums,
Yes.
we used to have a vibrant capital market, and now we didn't have that sector in terms of financing that financial instrument to finance the capital market. So I hope that by 26 April, where they are going to introduce the new note, not the new currency,
Yes.
the new note
Yes.
will have a stable
Capital market.
income budget with a single digit of 5%. But I think we need to zero in terms of introducing the new financial instruments, which will deepen the capital markets. Because if you look back, you will find that by January, February, March, in most countries, even developed countries, you will find that the budget would not have been allocated. You will find that the ministry will be using money from the capital market to fund the budget. I thank you.
Thank you. I think that was more of a submission than a question. Thank you for that, Kaikisa. Very insightful. Yes.
Yeah, I've got one or two things. Maybe to try and also write on what Uchive has said. I would like to find out how much of the budget has been allocated to Chapter 9 of the NDS1, which speaks to devolution of power and the decentralization program. And I would also like to know if the Minister of Finance has put in place, whether is it through NDS1 or through the budget statement, any legal framework for the fiscalization of the devolution of power. Because he admits in his NDS2 that devolution of power has failed since the 2013 Constitution. So I would like to know whether what is written in NDS2 is it supported by any budget provisions. He speaks of conferences, investment conferences, where that is just something to eat money and enjoy and drink mazol. But the cause of the matter is there any appetite in terms of coming up with the legal reforms? Maybe my second point is that we are talking about now we're talking about post-budget. And I think from an accountability point of view, the doctor there spoke about figures, at least PPRIZ got figures, evidence-based advocates, about those that overspent and those that underspent. Is there another process where, as a nation, we also receive the financial statements of the country and analyze them and see, because we can't only be analyzing the budget and not analyzing the expenditures and the allocations and all, and then we say we are doing accountability. I think accountability must be in the input into the budget, and then see whether the allocations have been done, and then we see how the expenditures have been done by those line ministries. Then we are going to speak into the issues to do with corruption and other wastages that come about. Then my third point is, I attended the budget consultative seminar at Selborne Hotel, and I was asked to do a written submission. I did 2 written submissions. I implore PPRIZ and you guys who are I'm not educated, who are educated, to find out where the rural council budgets dovetail with the national budget. Where does Mtuli and his budget and all these fancy things that they do reconcile with the budget that is done by my Bulawayo District Council? Imali leziyana ezithathwa ngabomama ezama-hard tax emthelo yamabhizinisi emakhaya ezitolo le mali zamadiba and all the budgets that the RDCs do. To what extent does Mtuli get to look into that deficits that accrue rural district councils, and then comes in with the funds, whether is it through the devolution fund or even whatever it does, and comes in and finances that. Why am I saying this? Because in terms of population, the Zimbabwean population is almost 67 to 70% rural, and they are about 20-something or 30-something in urban areas. So even in those urban areas, there is no grant that comes to the Bulawayo City Council or the Harare Metropolitan or these other cities. So I've got a sense that we've got this government that sits up there in velvet offices, and we've got the population down there, Rural District Council, our local government, but there is no equal sign which says, I've put in so much equals the RDCs, I've put in so much equals the local government, who will help us with debate, who will national budget.
Okay. So many questions, but I'll try to recall. Perhaps the first one speaks to the allocation for devolution, whether it is consistent with the dictates of NDS2. Is support in the budget. Yes, I think 14.4 billion was allocated towards devolution, which is a significant increase, which is showing consistency with the provisions of NDS2. So I would say that is reflected in the budget. But when we look at the other concern, you mentioned the collection of funds from rural rural councils who are governed by the Rural and Urban Councils Act, right, under the Ministry of Local Government. A similar question, I think, was raised during the pre-budget seminar. And the minister's response was that once funds enter the government coffers, they are under a consolidated fund. They do not reflect which source of income brought them into that fund. Their decision to allocate now will be on preferential basis, to say how urgent is what is applied for vis-a-vis the cash that is in the coffers. So the model of a consolidated fund creates votes for them. Through their Ministry of Local Government, they are supposed to then access their funds through that. So the disconnect is,
Yeah, my input to that is,
yes,
if our population is, let's say 60%,
yes,
and even those people that live in towns,
yes,
that's where the bulk of the people is. That's
yes,
where there's bulk of service. That's where your health is. That's where your road is. That's where there's
that is where there's levies, yes.
But our state, our government itself sits up there and has got no line. Now he says maybe I'm going to put in that point.
Yes.
But there has to be a direct, because that's where the people are. So the question is it a people's budget or is it a government budget?
So
the 20% that sits in benefit offices.
So perhaps I would not have a clearer answer to that. But I would appreciate that there's a breakdown in the fiscal contract from the local government right up to higher levels. In some instances, we find that the revenues that the local authorities would collect, they've been collecting versus service delivery, there is always a disconnect, which is a breakdown in the fiscal contract. That is discouraging people from formalizing and paying their taxes. They would argue that I don't see the equal sign like you said. We've been pushing and clamoring for a commensurate a service delivery vis-a-vis the levies and the taxes that are collected. I would not dispute that there is a disconnect even with our local authorities. At times when you look at their budget, their current budget, every year, year in, year out, you look at their budget, 3/4 of it is reflecting wages and salaries and other consumables, not direct service delivery. We always have those contentions when we have pre-budget consultations. But because of our low representation in such consultations, perhaps we also see a lower response, but it's a genuine concern. The fiscal contract breakdown discourages formalization, especially from a micro level to a macro. But especially with us, you look at this year's proposed budget for the local authorities. It's a significant chunk, even last year's. But I will tell you the bigger part is just debt. Their balance sheet is a they call it the Potemkin economy, where it looks glorious and just to impress financiers to extend credit to them, but they would have window dressed their balance sheet, because a debt would reflect as an asset and creates a healthy looking balance sheet. But I'm agreeing with you that there is institutional quality needs to be improved so that we encourage formalization. Yes.
Yeah, my another question, I'm hearing a lot about us having our own currency.
Yes.
It is sounding like it's something to be celebrated. But from the economics that I know, a currency becomes a currency because of production. So I'm wondering, this like new currency, like it's something to be celebrated. What mechanisms are there to revive the production so that we can talk of a new currency? Given what we are seeing on the ground, are we really supposed to be made to celebrate a new currency when we are seeing outside the production? What is supposed to come first?
I think that's a very good question, a very researchable question. I think I will give one of my students a dissertation on the causality between production and so some of these questions are presenting dissertation opportunities. If there are students listening, there are opportunities for an econometric analysis to say the causal effect, which one causes the other. Yes. Okay. Yes.
That also started from ZCON.
Yes.
That was there during ZITF,
Yeah.
at ZITF.
Yes.
But I think it's too early to talk about monocurrency. The economy on its own has to speak on itself that now we are ready for the monocurrency. It's too early to talk about that. And now that we have an agenda, according to our blueprint, Agenda 2030, I think it will shun away investors. So as much as politically and from the head they are talking about monocurrency, I think it's too early. But my worry, being a Bulawayo person, talking also to the previous observation of allocation of devolution fund, I'm worried that in future, devolution fund, if it's allocated based on the provincial contribution to GDP, what do we have as Bulawayo? Previously, statistics has shown that we've been doing quite well, but as of now, I think we are going backward. Possibly, if we are to rely on devolution fund, we are likely to face serious hits because we are not contributing much on the GDP. From the manufacturing side, we have been relying on the textile, the leather clothing, just quite a few. But at the moment, on the devolution fund is currently devastating. Then we also have the issues around the, I'll say, assessment, monitoring, evaluation, right? To say when it comes to allocation of disbursement of funds, right? We have seen infrastructural development that is making noise currently in Zimbabwe, but how much has been allocated versus how much has been used is worrisome, especially on issues of dam constructions, roads. Now we are talking about Bulawayo Vic Force that is not even mentioned within the budget. So who is financing that? How far are we since they have started them? There is progress there. But we know that we cannot support or finance the infrastructure using the fiscal, right? Because we have a problem of the crowding out effect to support our local developments. But how is it if we attract investors that will come and also partner with our government and even the local players so that we support the infrastructural development? Yeah, but then I'm also worried about issues of assets management, focusing on the NRZ which can also contribute meaningfully to GDP in the province. How is it if maybe it's meant to support the local province, whether we are going to privatize, what is the position possibly in future, I don't know, than just to have the ghosty
Industry.
things.
Yes. I'll take Kuzura as well.
We've had various checks, we've had what different kinds of currency. So that's why I'm asking, Doc.
Yeah,
Ukuthi ikati imali sesatshintshe ezingaki imali eZimbabwe?
Venisic is an admission that we have seen past failures, but this time we are identifying and trying to increase central bank independence. I think if you look at the central bank independence this time around, it's very different from our previous experiences, acknowledging the impact of the various currencies. But I will also respond to her before I come to Dr. Kuzura. You're right, devolution calculated on the in terms of GDP contribution is not quite equitable in its distribution. Largely because of information asymmetry. You know, our calculation of our GDP, especially in Bulawayo, where the majority of the firms are family owned, the accuracy of our GDP is also questionable. Our provincial GDP is quite questionable. Yes. Then on the issue of NRZ's contribution, I think they are currently involved in a strategic plan to try and have an entrepreneurial department that will reevaluate those assets and determine at what they are creating an estate department, estate management department under NRZ to actually see how they can profitably lease out most of their infrastructure. But I think they are still in the process of doing that. That would also improve our provincial GDP. But there are also efforts to try and utilize big data to calculate provincial GDP. Because there is currently no accurate, readily available method of calculating provincial GDP that we can produce as evidence currently. But now with the age of AI and blockchain technologies, we can utilize those to accurately produce much more reflective statistics, especially for our province, that will reflect the true nature of what is going on. Because now the world has moved towards even utilizing satellite technologies to observe nighttime activity that contributes to GDP instead of the 8 to 5 general traditional way of calculating GDP. Kuzura, then.
Okay, thank you, Doc. My contribution is more from a pessimistic perspective.
Good.
I think, over the years, one thing that I have noted is that we have a problem as far as our budgets are concerned in Zimbabwe. Mm-hmm. Like most of our policies, brilliant on paper, what air balloons that produce nothing. As a student of literature, I would say much ado about nothing. Mm-hmm. Looking at this current budget that we are discussing, mm-hmm. my biggest problem comes from its reliance on assumptions. Mm-hmm. Or should I say over-reliance on assumptions? Mm-hmm. Specifically, I want to pick on 3 issues. Mm-hmm. Number 1, the budget relies on rainfall patterns. Yes. Number 2, it relies on commodity prices. Mm-hmm. And number 3, it relies on currency stability. Mm-hmm. And all those 3 are factors that, looking at the current situation, cannot be controlled by our government. Mm-hmm. A drought can loom anytime. Mm-hmm. It means our budget goes down the drain. Mm-hmm. Commodity prices are subject to global patterns. We cannot control them. Mm-hmm. Current stability in Zimbabwe, I think that one is not worth debating. Mm-hmm. So you find that at the end of the day, we have a budget being presented because it is customary to have a budget presented every year. That is why Dr. Kura there was talking about allocations versus disbursements. I want to add to that and look at demand versus the actual allocations. For example, Ministry of Health got 28% of what they had asked for. Total allocations to departments in government is actually a third of what governments of what ministries had requested. Mm-hmm. They requested over 800 billion, mm-hmm. and the budget is less than 300 billion. Mm-hmm. So at the end of the day, you can clearly see, I think we're a nation that is so used to rationing that even our budget is a rationing budget, right from the allocations. That at the end of the day, yes, we can discuss, but is it really something worth talking about when we know that at the end of the day, Dokura hit the nail on the head. Allocations were made. Up to now, we are in December. Not even one government department has received more than 60% of its allocation. Then at the end of the day, we talk of surplus. How do you talk of a surplus when government departments were asking for disbursements and they were being denied their allocations? And I think we heard what Mtodi said in Parliament. We don't have to discuss it. He said it openly, he said it clearly. Why allocations are not getting to ministries. So do we have any hope with this budget? Let's go to the question of devolution. You know that since 2019, we have never had a budget that had met the 5% threshold of allocation towards devolution. Number one. Number two, despite having budgets that were less than a requirement, we have never had a budget that had managed to disburse 10% of the allocation towards devolution activities. So do we have any hope in this budget? I rest my case.
Yes, I think Kuzura has made submissions. I'm trying to figure out. The question is, do we have hope? Well, that's open to you guys. Do you have hope? What I did was unpack the budget, explain the allocations and what is entailed. Needs against there's a disconnect. Yes, pre-budget seminar, I think similar sentiments also came out. Is it needs-based? Yes. Yes, talk. Talk. Maybe let's hear him first and I'll come to you. He hasn't spoken.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Please introduce yourself.
Dr. Jabez Moyo.
Yes.
From Lupane State University Business Management Department.
Yes.
I've decided to seize this chance because I noticed people are no longer asking questions.
Yes.
They are making submissions.
Yes.
So I felt my contribution would be relevant now. So I foresee, maybe I'll start from what he said. Maybe I'm one of those who don't have hope. Why? From an entrepreneurial perspective, I foresee challenges in the positive growth trajectory. How do you foresee a growth when you are increasing VAT and the intermediate transfer tax? Of course, this one is going to create higher compliance pressure on businesses. That discourages formalization efforts. So how do you grow when you are informalizing the economy as such? Also, profit margins have been squeezed by 1%, like what Dr. Akura said. 1% is a lot on business terms. And also, the marginal allocations to the youth line ministries, they also negate youth entrepreneurship impact to employment creation. And finally, maybe I may ask something. The defense budget is so huge. Are we at war? Thank you.
All right, let me take his question as well.
Okay, mine is just a follow-up on what my colleague is saying. One solution here to come up with the suggested measures. I think if those variances, all things being equal, they should have been investigated. Why a ministry is getting 30%? Why a ministry is getting 202%? What is the motive behind somebody getting 202%? While is the ministries which provide social services like health, they're getting 30%, 28%, and somebody's infrastructure development? I'm an accountant myself. You know what you say? When you want to, we will start wondering if somebody is saying want to go and buy a truck or want to build a road, but he doesn't want to pay services, doesn't want to pay living expenses. We are start wondering, what is the motive behind that? 202%, while if somebody has got 30%, becomes something which needs to be investigated. So if there is a variance in any situation, such variance need to be investigated. That's the first thing. When you're investigating those variants, you want to take corrective measures. Are we doing that? Doc? Are we doing that like what Sebuzro was saying, like what my colleague was saying, they everyone? That's the major problem. They could have started by looking and investigate what are the causes, what are those variants should have been investigated, then corrected in the next budget for 2026. So that when they know that they've got 30% for education, they were supposed to budget along 30% of the amount allocated. Maybe the variances, because those variances are too much. So that is my worry that you maybe you are there in the top. I think we need to try to advise them accordingly that when we have got such variances, they need to be like these figures they are being written. It's true. You won't get these figures easily. We can get them because through some of the other means. Why they don't want those figures are not being released? Because we need transparency. Transparency is what is very important. Transparency and disclosure, that is very important. Those are the fundamental when it talks about the finance, but that is not the case. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I'll try to talk to my sister there.
Yes.
From Lupane there.
Yes.
Who are saying if it means we are to be allocated our share in terms of the provincial GDP, Bulawayo tends to get the lead because we have nothing. That's true. If you look at Bulawayo now, Bulawayo doesn't even expand in terms of land. If you use the Matopo Road, before you go to Matopo, you first go to Umkuza. If you use Harare Road, before you go to wherever you go, you first go to Umkuza. If you go to Cholocho, before you go to Cholocho, you have to pass through Umkuza. So in a nutshell, you will find that even the spatial developments which are happening in terms of peri-urban, they are no longer within the influence of Bulawayo. If you look when you are going to airport, when you just pass that Umkuza River, when you see that magnificent house of Prophet Chiza, you are already in Umkuza. And those people, they are building a complex there. And that value doesn't add to Bulawayo. If you look at PPC, yes, the PPC for cement, it's not in Bulawayo, it's in Umkuza. McDonald's bricks is not in Bulawayo, it's in Umkuza. So how do we now we add the value as Bulawayo so that we have our GDP increase? My only solution is to resuscitate Zisco Steel. If Zisco Steel was alive, Bulawayo was going to be more valuable than before. Because once the Zisco Steel is alive, it means there's an increase in demand of coal at Wange. And now we'll be using wagons to transport coal to Zisco. By so doing, it means there's an automatic resuscitation of NRZ, which was headquartered in Bulawayo. There's no way, any other way where you can take the headquarters of railways and put it in Harare, because you have to come from, the coal has to come from Wange, Bulawayo, then goes to Zisco Steel. Then if Zisco Steel is resuscitated, it means Wange is also resuscitated. Then Wange will give birth to NRZ. Then while you are there at Wange, it means even Zesa is going to benefit. And then while Zisco is being resuscitated, it means in terms even of our agriculture, if you look before, during the Smith regime, the Smith was having sanctions, but it moved on in that model. You find the sledge, which was being produced as a waste of Zisco Steel, was used in the manufacturing of fertilizer. So you will see that it was a blockchain of production, thereby giving Bulawayo a better GDP, whereby we have those companies which was doing rolls, train rolls, which were here in Bulawayo. Yes. Then on another note now, we say, how do we consolidate that? How do we move on that as Bulawayo? You have got activists. As activists, these are the things which you should be advocating for. If you look now, there is a talk of Dangote coming, Dangote building a refinery in Bulawayo. But the honest truth, the refinery won't be in Bulawayo. It won't add value in Bulawayo because there is no space for an oil refinery in Bulawayo. So it means Mat South, in Matopo there or in Plant, they are the biggest benefiters. So I think we need to look into that, and then we advocate for the opening of those closed companies like Zisco. If Zisco is open, everything it goes. Then I come to the issue of my brother's Pato. I think I got a document from someone. We're asking, saying the budget was not, is it a people-centered or whatever budget? We are saying it doesn't show in terms of Matopo Rural District Council did this. I think I will share with you that document, whereby it gives an audit before the presentation of the budget, whereby it gave an audit of all line ministries and all the departments and all the RDCs. I think that's where there's an issue of where institute like Lupane State University came to. With you guys, you charge school fees. After charging school fees, you come to the minister, you say you want so much, but you don't tell us how much you have generated from the fees and how much you have spent that money. Then on the issue of monocurrency, there is no country in the world which has developed using the borrowed currency. Even when you go to World Bank, they will tell you that you need to have your monocurrency. But there are some fundamentals which have to be made. If you look now, they are saying the Reserve Bank is saying it's now having almost 1 billion. But we are saying no, you can't say with 1 billion you want to introduce the currency. So you better make it for 6 billion, because the 6 billion will take us 3 months in terms of import sustaination. Thank you.
He's advocating for industrial policy than fiscal policy in driving economic growth. Countries have made turnarounds globally, even in the 21st century in developed countries. Industrial policy is currently driving growth. Not fiscal policy, not monetary policy, but industrial policy. So we need a sound industrial policy. That's why the Ministry of Industry and Commerce has a Zimbabwe Industrial Development Program 2, whose consultative process also led people from the industrial hub, which is Bulawayo. But we need to revisit. As scholars, let's come up with researches on industrial policy. There is great opportunity there. Time.
I think I'll try to speak to the way forward.
Yes.
I know it's good to school but then like question why is look as budget financial expenditure government? I think one of the things that we must advocate for is a complete, wholesome accountability framework on fiscal budgeting and expenditures and all. Our reports Auditor General Lawan, we must see Nalapant through us civil society, PPRIZ leading the way. Uti sihlale phansi sibizwe Auditor General abuye lapha the Minister of Finance abuye lapha azositshela ukuthi yena ama expenditures alahambe njani. We discuss and we force a culture of accountability on our government, because if we don't, abantu laba bona vele bayawona bona and thina singayekela thina ukuthi siba hold the account. Don't expect them ukuthi bazabuya bathi no laba phela silahlile ministry le spend 200% enye le 30%. Let's create thina programs that will force them ukuthi umthula abuye lapha sihlalela phansi asitshela ukuthi kanti lokhu kuhambe njani kanti why vele lize lingabi le income and expenditure lokhu zenini esi-interrogatayo sizwe sonke nini, because we can't just keep sisenza ama-budget seminars about a budget but singazake sibuze ukuthi imali yakhona idliwe njani. And even from an enterprise point of view, and when you are doing enterprise development, the crux of the matter is when you are doing the consumption of the funds, not really how you plan to. Your quality of business management is based on how you deploy and utilize those funds. If you fail there, then your business fails. So Tina, let's move. Of course, this finance level budget, but let's move ngale kudleni imali ukuthi kanti imali idliwa njani.
The Auditor General's report that he was referring to. If you give access to that, you will see that the institutional decay starts even from our local authorities. You'll be certain in how they have qualified the reports as local authorities, but they come here, give us a funny PowerPoint presentation as a budget for us to make a decision on whether we approve their expenditure or not. We've never interrogated whether they follow the proper accounting standards in reporting their budgets when they give it. But we are the learned ones. But I'm just opening our eyes to that. But back to the facilitator, the hot seat is now too hot.
Thank you so much. Maybe in terms of my response, we all have a responsibility here in terms of trying to dilute some of the information that we received. I know there is always a difference in terms of the language that is used for different disciplines, but I think the responsibility also lies upon us in terms of being able to inform those who are not well versed with economic issues. And I think even as academia, as media, as CSOs, I think it's also our responsibilities to be able to ensure that this knowledge is understood clearly. Thank you so much, Mr. Dlamini. I think there was quite a lot of robust debates on the current national budget. I think, unfortunately, we have to contend with two things: the pre and also the post. In terms of the pre, we're still not yet satisfied, and now we're in the post period where we still have reservations. But I think as we also look at our national budget, what is important is that we should consult the means and not wishes. At the present moment, it seems there are more of wishes than the means. How are we going to do this? This is where we have an issue. And I think maybe as somebody who's also within the public policy sphere, and also as an organization within the public policy sphere, we also want to understand how then are we going to deal with some vulnerabilities that our economy is confronted with. For example, we can talk about external shocks. For those who know climate change issues, literally it reverses agricultural productivity. We've been talking about cotton, etc. And I also have that question in my mind: how then are we going to be able to deal with such external shocks? And also even commodity price swings. That is also one thing that we do not have a control over. But however, thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us today. Let's also continue having these debates and also these consultations. I think the economists here, their offices are open, so that at least if you need clarity on one or two issues, you can actually be able to be assisted. But however, I think for today we can continue with our discussion. There's a small snack there by the corner, so that at least people can be able to snack on something, and also maybe if there are any questions that you need to ask our presenter and also other people on the floor who are also able to contribute, that would be greatly appreciated. But however, I would like to thank you for coming today, for honoring our invitation. I would also like to thank the PPRIZ team for being able to organize this event at a short notice. But however, we are more than grateful for your attendance, and also to thank Bulawayo Progressive Residents Association for also giving us this platform to be able to discuss here. And I hope that we are going to continue having these policy barazas, so that at least we continue also being able to share some of this knowledge and information to others who deserve it the most. So thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen. I think for now we end here.